with Jerry Maguire at Tom Cruise. I'm not gonna cry, Sinead. I'm not gonna
Oh yeah,
cry, Anthony. I'm not gonna do it. As part of my ninja training, this is actually part of our tradition. You get this name when you reach third degree, which takes many years to get. So my teacher has to go through this process, this kind of old traditional process of coming up with this warrior name. And my warrior name was Intoshi. Intoshi means warrior of the blade of shadows, and everybody accepts you in both realms. The shadow is not fully existent in the dark, it's not fully existent in the light. I had the dream about the lottery numbers. The next day I tell my mom, turns out that that's correct. One day I go to sleep, I wake up in this sweat, panicked, and I grab my tape recorder and I start singing this song. And I put it down and kind of let it go. Now what spawned that was that in my dream there was a lady and she was singing, so I went from like a complete panic state to like getting it out and then falling back to sleep. Like it was just like whatever it was like, you gotta record me or I'm not gonna let you sleep, you know. Like you gotta do it. Somehow something in me, like in these helpers or whatever they are, has me humming this thing just at the right time for the right person.
That.
So when the guy says, "What is that?" I'm like, "What is what?" He's like, "What you're humming." I'm like, "I'm humming." And that was the first time that I was confronted with, there's something else going on that we don't understand, that we may not even acknowledge, but still plays out on the world stage. It will make itself come to fruition. If you don't listen, it will use you to get out into the world as a conduit.
Welcome to Fire in the Cosmos. We are here today joined by the amazing Hakim Isler. Hakim is getting pretty well known now for the work he's doing, starting up the first annual Psi Games, taking place August 1st through 3rd in Charlottesville, Virginia. I had a chance to meet Hakim a few months ago at Archives of the Impossible, and I met the amazing Sinead through him at Contact in the Desert just last month. So Hakim is the creator of the Psi Games, which is a dynamic and inclusive platform for individuals with psychic abilities to grow by learning from experts, connecting with peers, and engaging in fun psychic competitions. He's also a renowned practitioner and teacher in consciousness exploration, holistic health, and personal development. With a bachelor's degree in Integrative Health Medicine, specializing in herbal medicine, along with extensive study in the 8 limbs of yoga, remote viewing, mind sight or extra-ocular vision, and ninjutsu. Hakim's training with some of the field's top experts fuels his research into the extraordinary capabilities of the human body, mind, and spirit. Hakim integrates these practices with the hands-on experience as a wilderness explorer and survival instructor to offer his comprehensive approach to human potential. Hakim served as a sergeant in the Army's Psychological Operations Group, or PSYOP. Hakim is a published author of 5 books. He's also appeared on numerous TV shows, including Discovery Channel's Naked and Afraid. I did not know this. Naked and Afraid XL, First Man Out, Fox's Kicking and Screaming, and MTV's Couples Retreat. Pretty diverse background. Hakim is also an advisory board member of the Monroe Institute, celebrated for the Gateway program, and a board member of the Center Lane Project, focused on preserving Ingo Swann's controlled remote viewing. Hakim plays a key role in advancing the study and development of human consciousness through his nonprofits QuestGate and the Soil Foundation. Hello, Hakim, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, good,
what
thank you.
Exhausting resume.
I'm excited.
Reliving it in my mind, I'm tired now. Okay, I'm going to leave and take a nap.
Like you've accomplished too much, you know? No, it's amazing. It is really amazing. Your resume is absolutely outstanding. And I think some people that listen to it are just like, this can't be real. This guy cannot be real. So we're going to go into this interview kind of proving who you are, I guess. That's not our ultimate goal, but we want to just show people more about who you are, what you're about, because a lot of the recent press has been about Psi Games, right? Which is amazing. But there's so much information out there right now already that we want to focus more on you and your journey. So, to help the audience get to know you and how you developed this ridiculous resume, it started with childhood, right? I mean, you had some experiences when you were a kid that you've told me about because we're friends, and you've shared some stories with me about your early life. And I know that you had multiple experiences with people saying to you, Hakim, you're different. You should be doing something different with your life than the average kid in the neighborhood. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about some experiences you've had where you felt like you weren't really part of what was going on around you. Let's start with that. And then we can move up to when you started talking about being a ninja at age 9, which is very early. You actually became one, but we'll get to that. So first of all, what kind of messages did you get in childhood that told you you might be on a different kind of path?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I had several precognitive events when I was younger that now that I look back, I know that's what it was. But when I was there, it was just a kid saying stuff, until they were proved to be true. And one of them was at that same age, 9 years old, I dreamt the lottery numbers. And I told I had the foresight or the awareness to tell my mom about it because she every so often played. And she played them locally and not nationally. They came out nationally, but not locally. And the national pot was actually bigger than the local pot. So we would have been, very wealthy, but that wasn't my path. So, probably things would be different if I was super wealthy when I was a kid. In that same year, my mom and my aunt asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And, without hesitation, my mom said, I looked at her with this big, enthusiastic smile, and I said, I'm going to be a ninja when I grow up. And her and my aunt kind of chuckled, and she said they didn't have the heart to tell me that wasn't like a real thing, like they were like, we didn't have the heart to tell them, and later I did indeed, and to this day become this ninja of a modern ninja and then practice in this ancient lineage. So those things were things that I could not have known, but I did, and they were very impactful. Later in my life, I had a best friend, and I remember that best friend, it was I always walked this really fine line. I wasn't completely immersed in the ghetto with like the worst people, and I wasn't completely not immersed with those people. I was kind of in this fine line, and I wasn't, my mom very early on started trying to get me into Catholic schools and private schools. A matter of fact, a fun fact that she probably doesn't want anybody to know, but I'm an adult now, so I'll tell it. No, is that actually she went to a loan shark and got money to put me in a private school.
Wow,
And
that's a
yeah,
good mom. Yeah.
yeah, and she realized it. She said it was like her and my aunt, they went down this back out. She said it was just straight out of a movie, a back alley behind a restaurant. This guy, he owned this restaurant, but everyone who needed to do that side work would have to come down this back alley and meet with him. And she said, I need this amount of money, and he said, okay, you get this loan to pay me back, and make sure you're not late, that type of thing. And she said okay, and they left. And she said the minute she left with that money and she paid it to the school, she realized like the magnitude of what had happened. Like she better pay that money back. And so she went and started working all these extra jobs and everything to get this cash. She was taking side jobs, bartending jobs, whatever she could. And she actually had like 3 weeks left to pay it back when she came back with the money. And she says the guy was super jolly and happy, and he had his like kind of crew there, and he was like, Frederica, you good, you good. I'll give you money anytime. I give you money anytime. You come back to me. You ever need anything. She does this accent really well, but um I'm trying to do it just because of the funniness of that encounter. But she was like, I never went back there, but it got you into school and it got you away from the violence. And that was what she was searching for.
And where were you? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Newark, New Jersey.
Okay.
And Newark is a pretty rough place to be. And I stayed there for some years, and then I ended up moving to New Brunswick, New Jersey. And that was better, but not much better. And I stayed there for many years. And to complete that circle of that thought, you know, while I was in New Brunswick, I met a friend. His name was Divine, and we became really close. And Divine lived in the ghetto, in the projects. And, you know, he had a very broken home and family, but we connected. We were like these two misfits in the high school we went to, and we both wanted to rap. And, you know, we both were kind of on the outskirts. You know, we were in and out. And he would always tell me, my nickname was Knowledge growing up. He would be like, Knowledge, you know, as much as you want to be one of us, you're not one of us. You know, you're something different. You know, like we're wolves. You're like in between. You might be like a sheepdog or something like that, but you're not like a wolf, and you're not a sheep. You know, but you're in between. And he was like, so, and that's funny because it's so impactful for me, because at the time I like really latched on to that because it was painful. It was like the one person that that I feel accepted around is telling me like I'm not like him, you know? And so, and then when I turn around and I look at the other folks who are living like really great lives, I'm not like them neither. And so who the hell am I? You know, like what am I in this equation? And that was very painful. But now that I look back at it, you know, I realize Divine went on to unfortunately murder somebody and spend a lot of time in prison. And that actually set me on the trajectory to become this ninja character. But, you know, he was right. When he ended up murdering that person, I was shocked and just appalled. And I was like, how could it be possible that someone who's so much like me could go out there and do that to somebody else, you know? And so am I going to be that way? Is that what I am? And then in that moment, that's where the words, those very true words that came from him were relived in my mind, which was, you're not like us, you know? So, you know, go and do what you need to do. But, you know, you may feel or want to be like us, but you're not. And here's a perfect moment that's going to help you understand that. And I felt like that was kind of a teaching moment that came. So I've had some very amazing guardians around me throughout my life, walking along with me or hovering or whatever they do, you know, high-fiving me every so often to help me. And it's stories like that that help me remember. You know, they were always whispering these little lessons, you know, hey, you are a seer, you can see into the future, you are a psychic, you know, you are somebody who has these abilities, or you're different, you know, in a good way. And so be aware of that. And anytime you forget that, we'll send these kind of messages through these people. And that was something that's a little bit about my childhood.
Well, I mean, that's powerful stuff. I'm here thinking like, I wish I had that, you know. I think so many people wish that they had those kinds of messages coming through, or those guardians around them at that time in childhood when they're sensitive like that. Because so many of us, the sensitivity or whatever our abilities are, they don't really get seen and they kind of get shut down. So it's interesting that even though you were, you know, I'm thinking about the dichotomy of like the world around you, and you said that it was violent, it was rough, it was challenging, and it was really hard, like the environment around you, yet you're experiencing this powerful messaging that's kind of lifting you beyond that and giving you a vision of something else that you could aspire to, even if you didn't know exactly what it was. So that's quite amazing. And actually, I just want to ask you one more question before I turn it over to Anthony about this experience. So, you know, even though it sounds like it was, as you said, very difficult to hear from your very good friend that, you know, yeah, you're not really like me, like we're friends, but you're not really like me, you're different. And that you were not a wolf, not a sheep, you're kind of straddling this line. I've heard you, you know, in our friendship, I've heard you talk about this, not quite in that way, but in the same sort of theme of living in this space in between, right? Like you feel like you're often straddling two realities, or you're in between two, I don't know, frames of mind or dimensions or, you know, realities or whatever it is. Like you feel like you're able to kind of go back and forth between them and live in this liminal space while being in this 3D so-called world. Can you think of any other examples, maybe in your teenage years or your 20s, where you became even more aware of existing in that space, not really belonging in one or the other, but being able to move between the two?
Yeah, so I think, there's some really defined, and this actually isn't when I was younger. It was when I'm younger than where I am now. Several years back, I think it's been probably like 10 years ago or something, I got my third degree black belt in this martial arts. And when you get a third degree, you get a warrior name. And so my teacher has to go through this process, this kind of old traditional process of coming up with this warrior name. And my warrior name was Intoshi. And I used to keep it really close to the cuff and I wouldn't tell anybody, but now I kind of share it a little bit more because I see the significance of it. The Intoshi means warrior of the blade of shadows. And so I was like, what the heck does that mean? Like I'm hanging out in the shadows, like taking people out. Like, what is going on? So, as part of my ninja training, this is actually part of our tradition. You get this name when you reach third degree, which takes many years to get. So I asked him, I said, where did this come from? And he said, well, if you look at your life, and I looked at it and I had to go through this process to come up with your name. In Toshi, the shadow. The shadow is not fully existent in the dark. It's not fully existent in the light. And what I find really interesting about you is one day you'll be teaching these little 5-year-olds, and then the next day you're this extreme military guy overseas, like doing the hard work and like, in like the most chaotic environment possible. And he was like, and you're comfortable and everybody accepts you in both realms. Like you're able to move very easily throughout different environments. Then next thing you know, you're having this philosophical conversation with somebody about consciousness. And then, the next thing you know, you're having a conversation with someone about herbal medicine, and like, and he's like, you're like in it all. You morph really well. And so the shadow that you cast, or the shadow that you are, is cast on the environment that you're in. So if you look at the person as the caster of the shadow, whatever environment I'm in, I'm able to blend in really well with that environment. And so that harkens back to this story of Divine telling me, you're not really like us. Like, we accept you, you fit in, you do the things, but we can tell like you're different. And so that concept has kind of followed me a long way, and me understanding that there was something unique about me. Now, the story I just told the other day, and I am not going to cry on this podcast. I sound like Cuban Goodie Jr. On what was that movie
Jerry Maguire.
with Jerry Maguire at Tom Cruise? I'm not gonna cry, Sinead. I'm not gonna
Oh yeah,
cry, Anthony. I'm not gonna do it.
I think the host was John Etta or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, no crying allowed. Keep going.
So, I believe 16 or so, and I was making music. I made rap music and electronic music, but I was making mostly rap music at this time. And I would sit like an old tape recorder next to my bed because I would always have these, and I would carry it everywhere. I'd have these moments of inspiration. So I had the black notebook and the tape recorder, carried it everywhere. And so one day I go to sleep, I wake up in this sweat, panicked, just like what, and I grab my tape recorder and I start singing this melody, right, in this song. And I put it down and kind of let it go. Now, what spawned that was that in my dream, there was a lady and she was singing to what I could only ascertain, because at the time I was in Catholic school, was Jesus on the cross. And she was singing this song, and it went like, I believe in you. And there was so much pain and it was so much emotion, and all of that like woke me up out of my sleep. And I was just like sweating and super intense. I remember I just grabbed, it's so vivid every time because it was so powerful in my life. It like imprinted on me. I grabbed this recorder. I started recording it. I get it out and then I put it back down and I basically fall asleep. So I went from like a complete panic state to like getting it out and then falling back to sleep. Like it was just like whatever it was like, you got to record me or I'm not going to let you sleep, like you got to do it. So months go by, totally forgot about it. I happened to be in Catholic school. I was in choir class, and there's this one guy who ran the choir class. His name was Mr. Crockstead, and he was the high school, that one cool teacher in the high school that everybody talks to. They always go to him for counseling. They tell him all the things that they shouldn't tell adults, and he's always there to help out. And that was this teacher. And he's on the piano. He's going through just tuning it as we are getting ready to do choir class, and I'm standing next to the piano, and I don't realize it, but I'm humming. So he says, "What's that song? What are you humming? I've not heard that before, but it's catchy." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He was like, "What you were just humming." And he hums it back to me, and I'm like, "Okay." And it's that song. It's the song from that 2 months before in this dream. So I'm like, I didn't realize I was humming that, right? And so he was like, "Yeah, it sounds really interesting." And he keeps pressing and pressing, and like, where's it from? And I'm really don't want to talk about it because it's just this weird intimate moment. I woke up and I don't know how to explain it, and it's just very overwhelming for me to like really explain what that is, right? So I'm just kind of excuse me, I kind of hesitantly explained to him this is what happened. And he was like, "Wow, that's powerful." He was like, "You mind bringing that recording in and letting me listen to it?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah." And I still was guarded. I didn't really want to, but I'm like, well, what could it hurt? It's Crockstead. He's the cool guy. So I bring it in. I let him listen. And he's like, "Man, this is really cool. Can I take it for a little while?" And I'm like, "Yes, take it away." My memory of it is like this very panicked moment, waking up in the middle of the night with this very hard and harsh song where this lady's singing with all this pain to this
Seriously.
Jesus on the cross. And I'm like, I don't want anything to do with it anymore because it was so painful. The pain she was feeling, the emotion. I was just like, okay, yeah, just take it away. So he takes it and he, I guess, works it. And months later, he comes back just about 2 months out from the Christmas concert that we do every year for this high school. And it was St. Peter's, and St. Peter's has a church in downtown New Brunswick, and that church is kind of the biggest Catholic church, in that town, or not ever, but in that town. And so everybody goes to that church, right? And in that vicinity, and so I was like, that's cool. And so we get to this point where he comes back, and he's like, class, sit down. And so we all sit down, and he's like, "I got something I want to share with you guys." I was like, "Okay, cool." So he starts to play the piano, and immediately it hits me. That's that melody from the dream. And then he goes through and he starts singing the words, and he has like all this stuff. And it's sure enough, he composed, like no crap, composed this song with alto, baritone, all of the pieces,
Wow.
like everything, piano. I mean, he wrote it. He drew. I mean, it was beautiful, beautiful, and it was everything. That all the emotion, all the feeling, everything that this lady was trying to convey. And so he gets done, and the whole class is like, "That was great. That was the most amazing thing I've heard. Like, what is that?" When he says, "Well, guess who wrote it?" And they were like, "You?" And he was like, "Actually, it's Hakim." And everybody looks at me, and I'm looking like a deer in the
I didn't do
headlights.
anything. I didn't do anything.
Yeah. I'm like, this is overwhelming. And they're all like, "Man, this is great." And he's like, "Do you guys want to sing it during the Christmas concert?" And everybody was a resounding yes, like, yes, yes. "And do you mind, Hakim?" And I'm just kind of like, just still in awe. And I'm,
Wow.
okay, yeah, let's do it. So we fast forward 2 months. We're at the Christmas concert. It's the last song of the night. Hundreds of people in this auditorium, because the Christmas concert was open to everyone who went to St. Peter's Church, not just the school. So we get there, we sing. He has me get up there. He has me explain the song. We start to sing the song, and we get done, and it's a standing ovation. Everybody in the room is standing up. They're clapping. Me and the choir, we start hugging each other. We're giving each other, congratulations. And I get a tap on my shoulder while I'm hugging one of the choir members. I turn around, and it's this old lady, and she's just extreme, like crying, bawling. And
Wow.
she grabs me and she holds me and she says, I needed that. I understand. I know. And like, she says some other things, but I can't remember what they were. And as I'm holding her, embracing this lady, and I got my head on her shoulder, I look up and there's a line full of people and they're all weeping. And they're all waiting to, and so for the next, like, I don't even know how long, we just go down the line, and everybody is hugging me and they're crying and they're telling me that they felt the message. And I was like, whoa. And it was so powerful because it was like, when I think about that story, I'm like, anywhere along that story, that thing, that message was supposed to die. Like, it could have died,
Mm-hmm.
but it needed to be born, and it brought itself into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I never experienced anything like that on that level. Of course, yeah, I had the dream about the lottery numbers. The next day I tell my mom, turns out that that's correct. That's a really quick turnaround,
Yeah. Yeah.
but this thing took months. And
Yeah.
I dismissed it. I had let it go. Like, I thought it was gone. Like, I said it's on the tape recorder with all the other songs that I do, and it's not my genre, so I'm never going to go back to it. Just somehow something in me, like in these helpers or whatever they are, has me humming this thing just at the right time for
I
the
was just
right
thinking
person.
that. I was just thinking that. Yeah. Like that
And not
subtlety.
Yeah, and not even realizing it. Like,
Yeah.
so when the guy says, "What is that?" I'm like, "What is what?" He's like, "What you're humming?" And I'm like, "I'm humming." He's like,
Yeah.
"Yeah." And then he recalled it, so he was able to hum it back to me. And then I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's this thing." And so it could have died then. Then he asked me to bring him this tape the recording. I bring him the recording and he takes it home. It could have died then. I mean, people, if you ask me, like today, I have all good intentions on a lot of things, but some things I just don't get to, and I forget,
Mm-hmm.
and then I have to apologize. And I'm sure there's a lot of people like that where you're like, oh, I'm going to do this thing for this person. I'll do it. And then you go to do it, but then life happens. And before you know it, you've forgotten about it. And then years go by, and then they're like, hey man, you never did that thing for me. And you're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. This is what was going on in my life. So that could have happened for him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because this composing a song with all of the parts and the pieces takes hours and hours and hours. He had to take a melody, some words, and then break that up into like a full piano piece with parts for a whole choir, so it would like, and he's got other things to do. Like, he could have been
Yeah.
doing
And it
anything.
speaks to what you were saying earlier about all these guardians you have just swooping
Yeah.
in and kind of helping you in these astonishing ways. This is one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he did it. He made this thing, and then he came back and played it. And of course, we all had input. So the choir could have been like, oh, yeah, it's okay, but we like all the other stuff we're doing, so we'd rather do that. This could have been that. But instead, they loved it. And so then we went on to practice it. And a couple months later, we ended up singing it. And then it had this amazing, profound impact on everyone in that auditorium. And that was the first time that I was confronted with, there's something else going on that we don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
that we may not even acknowledge, but still plays out on the world stage. It will make itself come to fruition. If you
Okay.
don't listen, it will use you to get out into the world
Yeah, that's so true. I mean,
as a
I get
conduit.
that in that moment, like I keep thinking as you're talking about that subtle moment. And you just shared this really incredible experience with us about this dream you had that became this entire other experience, not just for you, but also for your class, for your music class, and for an entire auditorium of people. It's making me think of a lot of different things, but one of them is your creativity and how a lot of people in this field, because you're known for Psi Games, you're known for PSYOP, you're known for martial arts, and this sort of a Naked and Afraid, this incredibly hardcore stuff you've done off in the jungle. and on many, other shows where you're really pushing the boundaries of what human capabilities are physically, right, and mentally. But creativity is also an aspect of you that I know is a very big part of who you are. It's a very big part of what you do in a lot of different areas of your life, including the creation of Psi Games and the creation of, for example, the Psi Games song. I think you haven't talked that much, from what I understand, about your background in music production and composition and engineering. Like, you created music, you were a rapper, you're a singer, that was a very big part of your life for a long time. Your creativity seems to have become something else as you've become older, and you're sort of channeling it in different ways, but it seems to remain such a big part of who you are. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit more about how the creative force that you felt that caused you to create that song and that affected all these people the way that it did. How would you feel like that same kind of energy, that creative force that keeps you connected, right, to the ethers and to whatever else is happening out there that's assisting you in your life? How does it show up in your life now? How do you feel like you're still utilizing that kind of energy?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a deep question when it comes down to, for those who have been creative, I was listening to a podcast with Greg Braden, the other day, and he was just saying that this creative spark that we have, and for those who have been creative, they quite often say, like, that didn't come from me. That felt like it came from somewhere else. Like, we surprise our own selves, like we pull something out of somewhere, and then we look back at it and we're like, where did that come from? Like, how did I say those words? And I recall as a rapper coming up, my nickname was Knowledge, because Hakim means wise leader and counselor. And so people would call me Knowledge. And so when I would rhyme, I would always have, like, it was before conscious rap. Conscious rap became a thing later, but it was called kind of conscious, and it wasn't always my story. I would see all of the things that were happening around me, and I would weave them into my own tales of how my perspective and then my friend's perspective and this other person's perspective all kind of coincided. And I would tell the story from everybody's perspective, and people would be like, wow, that was amazing. And I remember in one particular instance, I was on a really popular radio station in New Jersey, and I had won a rap battle, and a good portion of it was like this high level, like, conscious stuff at a time when, like, the other guy was like, I'll shoot you up and I'll and I'll pop you in the head. And I always look back at that and I'm like, this creative energy it's just something that I think is another part of our multidimensionality that we are able to pull and resource from, that enables us to spark some inspiration in others in the world. And that's kind of like what we are. Like, we are like these little sparks, and then we're sparking other people and other people, and then together we start to have this. Or I've heard it, candles, or somebody just said to me, like, lights, strings of light, if you put them all side by side on a house, it looks really awesome. But the light is not as powerful as it would be if you took all of them and rolled them in a ball, and then you looked at it, it would become this huge illuminating force. But when it's strung out, it's like, okay, that's beautiful, but it's not as powerful, because each individual light has to do its own thing. And I think in some way this creative force is there, and we can tap into it, and that creative energy kind of helps us understand that we are a part of this overall greater creative consciousness. And I heard Adam Curry talk about this on Third Eye Drops the other day, and he was saying, or maybe it was Michael Phillips, he was saying that there's a theory out there that maybe that the consciousness itself has a certain level of creativity, and it brings things into the world, and we think that it's really random, and it's really not. It's like, it has a plan, it has its own plan. Like, consciousness is sentient in its own way, and we look at it as like kind of being this thing that we just pull from. But maybe it's, and in my example where I talk about consciousness being like the ocean is actually very much alive. It's not, we think of it as, oh, it's just this body of water hanging out there and doing its thing, but if you see dead water, like stale water, and then you see the ocean, you know they're totally different. You know, if I'm in survival scenario and come upon some stagnant water, you like literally know it's stagnant. Everything that's living is not living in the water. Everything that's living is not going to the water. You see no tracks leading up to it. And it's just the opposite with like the ocean or a river or a lake that's alive, you know? And so I think the same thing in consciousness. There's something very much alive there and it interacts with us and that it can interact with us. And even though I've had my own experience with like AI making music and stuff like that now in the modern day and creating certain things, I'm not sure yet if that stunts my creativity and my ability to tap into that, or it allows me to tap into it more, which is a whole nother topic. Anyway, I'm
Yeah.
talking in some circles. So I want to kind of like leave it there. Hopefully that some of that answers the question.
Great. Thank you so much, Hakim. Yeah, those are amazing experiences up until that point in your life. From that point, can you share with us how that eventually got you into the military? And I know you mentioned that you served working PSYOP. So that has a pretty negative connotation in this field. So if you don't mind sharing a bit about that as well, I think that would be great.
Yeah. So really quickly, so just to kind of add this kind of filler, my friend that I talked about earlier who murdered that guy set me off on, that was around when I was 20, 21. It set me off on this trajectory to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And so I'm like, I'm good at music and I'm good at martial arts and I can do music anywhere. But martial arts, you know, which one? Up to that point, I've been training since I was 8 years old in martial arts. And so that was what, 12 years or something of that nature. And I was like, I've done all these different things. Which one is going to be the thing? And I end up through I had a dream, another dream. And in that dream, I was battling this shadowy figure. Right. And I was like, whoa, what is that? So I woke up again and I'm like, I just remembered that so vividly. And I was this weird kid that always had this ability to like link up with older people and like be friends. So here's a really weird story. So I'm going to the same Catholic school that I wrote, you know, I Believe that song. It's called I Believe. And there's a substitute teacher there. And I'm not sure if anybody knows about Doogie Howser, MD, the
Oh
show, but it was this young geeky kid who like was super smart. And so he ended up becoming a medical doctor, although he was like in 18. Well, we had this substitute, and it's, you know, is called Mr. Lucas. And he was literally looked like Doogie Howser, MD. He was this young guy, but he was like a physicist at Rutgers University, right? And to make some extra money, he worked as a substitute. And actually, we became friends because I tried to cheat on one of my physics tests, and he caught it because I thought he was just like, you know, a dumb high school substitute, you know, and he was like this brilliant like physics guy. So he calls me in the office. I'm like, at the time I'm maybe 16 or 17, and you know he's like 24, 25. And you know, so he's pretty young, and he looks at me, but he's brilliant again. So he looks at me, and he's like, you know, what do you know, did you think you would really get this over on somebody? And I was like, yeah. And so he made me do all this stuff so he wouldn't tell the principal and get me suspended. Um, and then we just somehow hit it off and became like friends. And then I went over his house and we would play video games and we would talk about physics, even though I didn't know a lot about physics. He would teach me stuff and all this stuff. So I'm this young 17-year-old with this 25-year-old who's a brilliant guy. Anyway, we lost contact for a couple years and I happened to bump into him and he was like, hey, what's going on? It's been so long since we've seen each other. I was like, yeah. And he was like, what's going on with you? So I told him this story and he was like, well, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. You know, I had this dream the other night, the shadowy figure and something, you know, and he was like, you ever heard of ninjutsu? And I was like, you mean like the Ninja Turtles? I had forgotten all about this 9-year-old thing. And so I was like, the Ninja Turtles or like, you know, like the character in the movie? He was like, yeah. And I was like, what about it? He was like, well, that's a martial art and you can study it. And it sounds like the shadowy figure might be like, have something to do with this ninja. The way it's kind of reflecting you. And I was like, okay. So he was like, you should look it up. So I left him, went immediately to the library because you had to do that. You didn't have like the internet to be all cool with. And I did have the internet, but it was the old AOL CD-ROM drive, and you had 1 gigabyte computers. Can you imagine 1 gigabyte computers today? Like my computer I'm talking on right now has like 260, so anyway, I go to the library and I look, and the first book I find was my teacher's book. And I take it home. It's called The Ninja and Their Secret Fighting Art. And it talks about his quest and all of the things. And I was just immediately drawn to it. I was like, this is what I need. The ninja were these like very well-rounded people focused primarily on enlightenment and understanding of nature. It was like everything I could ever imagine. I was just like, that's it. So I came home. I told my mom I was going to save up some money and I was going to go to Ohio. But first I was going to write this letter to this guy. And she was like, okay, whatever. I didn't really explain to her it was like this ninja thing. And so I wrote him a letter in snail mail, no emails back then. Well, it was there were, but very, very slow. And so I sent him a letter, and 3 months later, a letter comes back to me, and it's this long letter. I still have it saved. I have it in this binder. And he's explaining like, your quest sounds a lot like my quest. I invite you to come down here and train and so on and so forth. So I saved money. I went there for 2 weeks. I saw him. I was like, this is where I got to be. I need to be here. He sat down with me. He talked to me. I thought that was very inspiring, that this guy who is this ninja master who is like super popular on all of the different magazines and books would take time to sit down with some random kid from New Jersey for a couple hours of his day. And I didn't pay him anything, like it was just like, it was amazing. So I came back and I told my mom, I said, I'm going to move to Ohio and I'm going to train to be this martial artist. She said, well, you're already doing martial arts. I said, no, I'm going to train this martial art. She was like, what martial arts? I was like, ninjutsu. She was like, what's that? And I was like, you ever heard of the ninja? And she was like, oh my God. I was like, what? She was like, you knew. I said, I knew what? She was like, when you were 9, you said you were going to grow up and be a ninja. And we all like chuckled and laughed and all this stuff. And I was like, really? And she was like, I had forgotten all about it. She's like, yes. So I spent the next year, believe it or not, I saved $1,200 and I moved to Ohio to train with this ninja master. $1,200. Like, I found this crappy apartment in the heart of the ghetto of downtown Dayton. It was $300 a month. Roach infested, all of the greatness, all the good stuff,
Wow.
And I moved in there, and actually it was supposed to be 400, but then later I became like a groundskeeper manager, and so he gave me like $100 off. But anyway, so I'm there and I'm living and I start training. And while I'm training, I meet this guy at a bodyguard seminar. My teacher was also the bodyguard of the Dalai Lama for a while, which is a whole nother cool thing. And I started going to executive protection school to be a bodyguard. And he had this seminar. So I was like, oh, I'm already going to school for it. I'm going to go and train. And I met this guy named Michael Brewer. And Michael was in the Army, and I had already had thoughts of going into the Army. I had already talked to like a recruiter. I was going to be special forces. And Michael was like, hey, I'm this thing called PSYOP. And I was like, what's that? And he was like, well, the ninja, they didn't have these overwhelming forces and they couldn't, they didn't want to fight a lot, but they understood psychology and how people worked, and they would use that to help them work and help them win these battles. And I was like, that sounds super interesting. He said, that's what PSYOP is. The actual tagline is to persuade, change, and influence the hearts and minds of a foreign target audience. And I was like, that sounds super cool. He said, it's special operations. You'll be hand in hand with the special forces guys. You'll meet all of the same dudes. You guys will go through all of the same training with just some small differences based on your specialty. Eventually they'll go to special forces schools and you'll go to PSYOP school, but you're going to go to language school. You're going to go to jump school. You're going to go to anti-terrorism school. You're going to do all this stuff. You're going to learn infantry tactics. You're going to go through that whole process. So I was like, wow, that sounds really cool. And he was like, if you decide to change over or switch to special forces, you can, because you're like right there. You're like, you know, you guys are hand in hand. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So that's how I started that process. So I went on this thing called the delayed entry program, which gave me a year to get my affairs in order, but I was already committed to the Army. And that's how I ended up going into the Army.
Wow. And regarding PSYOP, psychological operations, I think most people are aware that we do this in foreign countries, and other countries do it to us and other countries as well. But in this field, specifically in the parapsychology field, in the UFO field, there is this stigma around the notion of information warfare or weaponizing information, manipulating narratives. How has your experience in the military in that field working abroad, how has that affected your perspective on this element of these topics?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. And one of the things, if I had definitely have had PTSD, but if I was to have a weird level or odd level of PTSD, it is coming back from over there and realizing all of the things that we were doing in that foreign country as far as PSYOP was concerned was actually happening here. And that was like, I was like, I can't trust anything or anybody, you know, like, and it took a while for me to kind of adjust, because it's a very odd feeling to have your commander say, this is what we need the people to believe, or this is what we need the people to do. And then you and a team, I was a thing called tactical PSYOP, which there's a regional and there's a, you know, PSYOP, and there's other levels, and they work on specific things. So regional might be like the whole region, like, you know, they would work at an embassy or something like that. Tactical means like I'm in the field, I'm getting hard data like right there. We might kick in a door, you know, the SEALs or somebody might come take these guys, and then we get information, and then we use that information like right there in the field as to what's going on. So we have to be capable warriors, but we also have to really understand how to use this information to our advantage and help it, you know, as much as we can. So it's a very odd and strange thing to have a commander say, this is what we want them to believe, and this is what we want them to do. And then you create a PSYACT. PSYACT is something that you don't hear a lot. It's a bunch of actions that create a PSYOP. Does that make sense? So a PSYACT would be like putting false information in this news, or some information. It doesn't have to be false or positive. Or we have 3 types of PSYOP. You have white, gray, and black, right? So you might have white PSYOP that you put inside a newspaper, and then you might do something on a news station, and then you might have word of mouth stuff going on around there. So all those are like actions, PSYACs, to build up the PSYOP, which is the overall goal of the thing. And so a lot of people don't know that, or they don't talk about it. So you do that, and then a month later you're out in the town and you're talking to people, and like, let's say for instance you said like teddy bears are green, right? And everybody who has a teddy bear there knows that teddy bears are blue, right? All the teddy bears are blue. But then you enact all these PSYACs, and then all of a sudden you're out in the community and you're talking to somebody and you're like, yeah, can I have your blue teddy bear? And they're like, that's not blue, that's green. And you're like, no, it's blue. And they're like, nah, it's green. It's green, you know? And you're like, that's a blue teddy bear. And they're like, no, it is green. Hey, guy, come over here. Tell him what color this bear is. And they're like, it's green. And you're like, wow. When you had to design a PSYOP, and then you see that PSYOP working, and it's reflected in your conversation with somebody, and they totally believe it.
Yep.
It's mind-blowing. It's very scary. It's very overwhelming, which is one of the things that I said when I came back to the US, is that I was going to write and I was going to talk about PSYOP and help people understand it so that they can identify it better. And so I've tried really hard to not use it in my own personal life as something that I do. And we swore an oath, like foreign target audiences, not domestic, not friends, not family. But what I also found is that influence and persuasion is something that we just naturally do as human beings. I mean, since we're babies, I got a little child, and if she wants to get picked up, she cries. That's influence, right? So it's not, these things don't have to be bad things. If you want to court a woman, there's a process you go through. Hey, I'm going to buy her flowers. Now she knows I like her, and I'm going to take her to dinner. Now she knows I really like her. And then we're going to spend some time together. So this is all part of that courting process. That's all influence and persuasion. Does that make sense? It doesn't have to be negative. We tend to think of it as only negative. But that's how it goes down. So that's one of the things that I think people miss. It's a tagline now. So people think, oh yeah, it's all negative. People are psyoping me. And so when they hear me and they say, or hear about me and they say, I just got an email this morning. The guy was like, so the psyop guy is going to collect all the psychic people. And that was it.
Talking
And I
about
was like,
Psi
thanks,
Games,
dude.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
I mean, it makes me think
and
of
I was
like
like, okay.
advertising. Yeah, I mean, it
Yeah.
makes me think of
Yeah.
advertising. Advertising is like a really easy way that we experience, I guess, something resembling a psyop, right? I mean, it's around us all the time. We're always, as you said, we're always influencing each other. It's not always negative. It could be very positive as well. And I want to use that to jump to the work you're doing now, because the work you're doing now, you're always wanting to create something positive. I mean, I know even when you were, I'm thinking of joining the military and becoming part of special ops and then PSYOP, you wanted to do it for positive, essentially positive reasons. You're not like, yeah, let's go get him. This is more of like wanting to be of service to your country, wanting to learn something of value, wanting to be of service essentially, right? Without getting too deeply into that. But then you left the military, you started your own martial arts schools where you started working with children. And so I know that started you on a different kind of path where you're applying this discipline and this structure and all the things you've learned, these hardcore lessons, you could say, in terms of training the body, training the mind, training children to become a certain kind of person where they can support themselves in life. They can feel empowered. They know what their skill sets are. They know how to handle conflict. But there's a softness to that experience of working with kids as well. And there's a sensitivity that's needed because children are so sensitive and they are so empathic just naturally because they're kids, right? They haven't yet become hardened to the world and cynical and suspicious of everything around them, let's say, right? So I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I feel like your work with kids is something of a bridge into this, I want to say softer, that's not quite the right word, but like more esoteric, more sensitive work that you're doing now that has to do much less with the physical, rigidity, structure, routine, discipline, and more to do with expanding and opening up human potential and building relationships between children and what they're capable of, children and their parents. This community that you're now in is so different in many, many ways than all of the other communities you've been part of in your life previously. So do you feel like children have been a bit of a bridge into what you're doing now? Has that opened you up to those more subtle experiences that we often have that transform our lives and help us become more spiritual beings and start going into that realm? Or was it something else? Like, what was the bridge for you between leaving the military and doing what you're doing now? I'm only referencing your martial arts schools and the children because that's smack in the middle. And there's something about kids and being around kids for extended periods of time that's really valuable and makes us reach a different part of us as adults than being around other adults. But I'm theorizing right now. So do you feel like the kids had anything to do with this, or was it just a natural road that you were going to end up on regardless, doing what you're doing now with Psi abilities and Psi Games?
That's a good question. So to go back to it, obviously PSYOP can be really bad, but it also can be really noble in the sense that the idea is that you are trying to get opposition to or remove opposition through this understanding of psychology, where there's another way to do it, and this is the debate we had over there all the time with different commanders, where we had to educate them on what we could do. Hey, I go to school for a year and a half to learn how to be PSYOP, and all you want me to do is play rock and roll music over a speaker. Like, that's not what I'm not a DJ, we have all these capabilities. And so the idea was like, these groups wanted to just like go in and shoot everything up and do stuff. And we were like, no, you can get a person to give you the information or to stop doing what they're doing just by understanding their psychology and using that as a means to quell the battle in them, and squash that battle without it actually becoming like a murderous killing thing. And so in that way, it's very noble. But it also has a dark side. It can be used to cause people to kill people, Just look at the Hutus and the Tutsis, like that was a straight up PSYOP where it was like the same tribe, but we're going to allow you guys to be more prevalent. And we're going to give this group and call you a different name and say that you're more, higher up on the class scale, even though you're the same tribe, We're just going to give you two different names and two different social statuses, give this one group. And now all of a sudden, these people are murdering each other and genocide, right? And it's like, whoa. So it has that other dark side to it. Now, so just going back to hit that and then moving out into the world, you see the same thing. It could be used to inspire a person to become a better version of themselves. It could be used to inspire a person to embrace more of their multidimensionality. It can be used to inspire a child to not be afraid to stand up for themselves and speak for themselves and become the thing that they want to be. Or it could be used to break a person down and turn them into a puppet or into a slave or into any of these other things, right? And so it has that same fine balance. And, we in the world, obviously I'll get up on a stage and somebody will be like, PSYOP, you're immediately evil. And I'm like, no, bro, like it's all about what you do with this stuff, and what just like there's spiritual abuse, spiritual teacher on the path of like, this whole enlightenment thing now all of a sudden creates a cult and has people like killing themselves and doing all types of crazy things. So it's that same type of energy is there. What the kids do for me in my training is the kids allow me to understand how to still be a child, and allow me to have that softness, that inquisitive nature. And that's one of the things that I really love about working with children is that, they will sometimes, of course, kids can be too playful and then they're like, not listening or not paying attention. So in that case, you may need to be the disciplinary and say, hey guys, now we got to focus on this thing and get this done. But sometimes you want to say, okay, explore that idea. What is that idea? And work with them in that way. The kids were the ones who actually put me on the path of looking for protocols that would allow me to teach people, especially children, about their psychic abilities in an easy way. Because what I saw at my school was many of the kids were running around doing these mantras, saying these mantras and doing these mudras, this finger tying, and they were saying these words, and it was words from animation characters, right? So they would be like, I'm Naruto, and they'd be calling on the Nine Tails, fox, and with their hand symbols, and they knew all of the stuff because they slowed it down and watched it in slow motion, and they knew the words. And I was like, guys, we have something like that in our martial arts. And quite often these young people would be like, well, show me, like, what can you do? And I'd be like, okay, well, I've been training with my teacher for 25 years, went into the woods. I was in the river. I was like, like I was dirty. Then I went to the Himalayan mountains and I had this experience. And for a child, they're like, I don't want to hear any of that. I just want to know how to do the thing, and have some fun with it. And that's where they are. And that spirit is a good spirit, I think. That's how we've all gotten here, that playful, inquisitive, why, spirit. And I was like, so how do we bridge that gap? Because what I do see is I see a lot of pain, hurting adults. And these adults have gone through this childhood and they had that inquisitive, that the open-eyed, wide-eyed full of potential, and then we somehow get restricted. And now me as a yogi practicing yoga, we see so much pain and so much suffering and depression and anxiety and all this stuff. And it's like, I'm looking at my 6-month-old and I'm like, she ain't got none of that. She's like, feed me and let me poop, change this diaper, bro. So that's about it. And I'm saying to myself, all that potential, and then you move on to problems and friend problems and relationship problems, and so I'm like, there's got to be a way to meet these kids where they are and have them enjoy these psychic abilities and really understand the full breadth of who they are. And so I started looking for quick protocols to teach that. And remote viewing was one that I was reminded of from my own teacher's journey, who very early on, and after coming back from Japan, linked up with a guy named Del Graff at Wright Pat Air Force Base, who was running the Foreign Technologies Division, who was doing research on remote viewing. And he had a tandem program, unbeknownst to him, that Hal Putoff and Russell Targ was running their program. Right. So again, how my life works, I would just now I've trained with most of the original remote viewers that are still alive, from the military project. And, but my teacher, this Ninjustu teacher, was with one of the originals. And here's even a more funny story. Del Graff wrote a paper on it that was a secret paper, on his findings about remote viewing. Right. And he sent that paper out to some people. Somehow it ended up in this drawer in Washington. And it was supposed to be locked up top secret, but it wasn't. Skip Atwater, the military gentleman, the guy in intelligence in the military, who was looking into how do we understand remote viewing and all this stuff, he had actually started looking into remote viewing, got assigned to another job, so left it alone, and then came to a new job, sat at a desk, his new desk that was assigned to him just randomly, starts to open up the drawers to put his stuff away. He opens up this drawer and looks in there, and there's a paper. And the paper is about remote viewing, which reignites his thoughts of, oh, we need to look into this. I forgot. I was on that path. And then he brought it to his boss, and his boss said, find out about it. And that was the start of the Army remote viewing program. The paper that was written was by Del Graff.
That's Project Stargate you're referring to?
Yeah, so Project Stargate is the later name of it, but yeah. And so he started that project, because he runs into this paper who is written by this guy, Del Graff, who just happened. It wasn't even Del's job. Like, he had another thing he was supposed to be doing, but he got curious about remote viewing and started just doing stuff on the side on his own. And then wrote this paper for, to explain to the government, this is what's going on. That paper ends up in this random drawer. And then Skip Atwater randomly gets assigned to that, opens it up, reads this paper, it reignites his desire. And then somehow I'm like on the peripheral connected to that, because then my teacher was training with Del Graff in a project that he couldn't tell anybody about. Del made him sign all these papers. So later he was telling us, I don't think the statute of limitations over, so I can't tell you everything, but there was this thing, and it was based off one of our Kuji powers for the ninja. And I remembered him telling me that, and later I met Dale, and now Dale's going to be at the Psi Games and all this stuff. So it's this interesting world. So to take it back, the kids started a lot of that for me. Me wanting to provide something for them, and then also going to these consciousness expos and things. And you very rarely see children. I suspect, as I'm saying this more and more on these different podcasts, that other people who host events will start saying, he's right, let me invite some more children. So I'm hoping that we see from this point right now, we're all witnesses, because we all go to these different conferences, and I'm sure you guys can attest that it might be one child, maybe two somewhere looming around, but there's very few children. That we'll start seeing more of that happen, as this idea starts to get out there. And that's what we really need, because many of these adults were children who were awakened, and because of their circumstances got shut down. and then found themselves having an experience later on in life and then reawakening and saying, oh my God, I had this happen when I was a kid. I was one of them, 9 years old. I'm going to be a ninja. Forgot totally about it. Then one day, like all these things happen. And then I'm like, I'm going to go study ninjutsu. And my mom's like, wait a minute, you were 9. This was like 12 years ago. You said this exact thing. You were going to go do this. And, you know, why I didn't do it back then, or you know, part of it was my mom didn't know. She didn't know that there was something like that out there, and she put me in other martial arts instead of that. So yes, children help me stay grounded. They help me stay you know, loose and inquisitive and fun and all those things. And so that energy is what I bring to this Psi Games. And I think there is pushback. There's pushback because people are like, you can't do this with just fun. It's got to be in a research laboratory with white coats and everything has to be super tight and so on and so. And I'm like, well, that is one way. We've been doing that for 150 years and haven't really moved the needle much. You know, we have research upon research that says this thing exists. Yes, it exists. This thing exists. Yes, it exists. More papers. This thing exists. Yes, it exists. But then when you talk to the average person, they're like, that's bullshit. It doesn't exist. You're like, well, you're obviously not informed. Yeah, because I'm not reading a scientific paper. I had this exact thing happen with a friend of mine. He was like totally against remote viewing. I don't believe it. It's all crap. So I sent him a paper on it, you know, peer reviewed, because he's like, I'm too smart for that. I've gone to school for this, and I've been researching science forever. So I sent him a paper. A month later, I get back to him. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Did you ever read that paper? He was like, I'm too busy to read a paper. I already know that stuff doesn't exist. You know, I'm like, that's my point.
Yeah.
My point is, we don't need more papers. We need to have fun. We need to join. We need a community. We need so many people doing this that the average person looks to his left and says, my cousin is doing this. I trust my cousin. Then they look to the right and they're like, my significant other's doing this. I trust them. It must be something to it. It's just everywhere now. That's how you make it prevalent. The researchers do the research because that's important. But it can't just be that, because we haven't gotten very far with just that. It has to be something else.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds amazing. So you at Contact in the Desert recently, you presented about this what you called cynetics. Am I saying that right? So it touched on a few things,
Yes.
One of which was ethics, if I remember correctly. Ethics is a topic that also gets brought up. I assume you've probably gotten some pushback about that with regards to working with children in this space, because there has been a darker component to some of these more secretive programs and how they've been potentially or allegedly abusing or utilizing children who may have these capacities for their own self-interest or for military industrial interests. And that gets into like the whole Gate program and allegations around that in the psionic space in this field. How have you addressed those, and what would you say to people who have those concerns?
Yeah, that's a great thing. I've been getting a lot of that, and that's just fear. You know, it has it happened, yeah, but should that stop us from evolving in a positive way? Absolutely not. So not everybody who wants to work with kids is trying to harm children. You know, sometimes we want to help. And so, but there are people out there who are trying to harm children. So we need to balance that out. And we can't do that with just being fearful. You know, one of the things that I got from the telepathy tapes was you heard over and over again parents saying, my child was having this experience. I wanted to help them, but I did not know where to go. So they're out there looking. And when you have people like that in the wind looking, it's really easy to take advantage of them. Does that make sense? If they don't know where to go, the first person with some credentials that pop up and say, hey, I'm here to help. What can you do? They can move stuff with their mind? Okay, yeah, come to my office. And that's how you get sucked into those programs, right? Psi Games is just the opposite. This isn't like some private backroom thing. We got people with track records who've been in the field for 50 years, and you can go and research their backgrounds. You know, this isn't like something that we're like, hey, only 5 people can come, and, you know, you got to sign this paperwork and nobody can see you and come in the building. And then that's where things get kind of scary, you know?
Yeah, you're being transparent.
Not wait. Yeah. not when you're on the world stage in front of videos and having people film you and you're doing this thing and everybody's cheering you on and you're having a good time. And, a matter of fact, if you make enough friends and you disappear, and then you got like 1,000 psychic friends that are like, what happened to Anthony? Like, all right, guys, we're all going to get on Zoom and figure out where Anthony is, that type of stuff is what we're doing is just the opposite. But people's fear of what they hear, and that's where the PSYOP, I think, is, right? How do you keep people from organizing and becoming powerful? You make them fear things, stupid things. So now I'm going to stay in my bubble and I'm afraid to go out of my bubble. That's the power for me as an organization that wants to keep people separated. We have them not come together because we know if they come together, it's powerful. This is what I think happened to the remote viewing program, right? So the remote viewing program got shut down, quote unquote, got shut down, right? But now what we're finding, and I had this conversation with Skip, and Skip was like, in private, this was before he went on Sean Ryan. The only reason I'm saying this, because if he hadn't said it publicly, just be clear, I would not tell what my friend had told me. But I said, do you know if there are other programs? Excuse me. And he said, there were 5 programs total. And I would know because of my clearances, and I was very high up in the military. And so there were other organizations that wanted their own remote viewers. And there were 5. He still wouldn't say what those 5 were, right? Well, one of them was the Army. We know that. And so I was like, what happened to the other ones? And he leaned in when he said the 5, and he just sat back and he was like, I don't know. Now, whether that's true or not, that he really doesn't know, we don't know. But the point is that there were 4 other programs besides the Army one. We know they shut down the Army one. But then what happened to the other 4 programs, right? So then he went on Sean Ryan. He said the same thing. There were 5 programs. Then you look at Hal Puthoff, who just went on Joe Rogan. And they were like, hey, Joe was like, they shut the program down. Do you know if they ever would do something like that again? And how, for the first time on live podcast or whatever in media, he says, well, when I left the program, I got called by, one of these groups, and they asked me if I'd ever be willing to come back and start another program, but this one would be under the board, not above board. And he was like, really? He was like, what'd you do? He said, oh, I was off to other things and I was more interested in these other technologies. And so I turned it down. He said, but if they asked me, they probably had some other people that they were going to ask. So the Army never shut it down, or the military or the government, you never shut it down. They shut one thing down that was public.
Yep.
And I suspect it was because they were like, okay, we don't know how to stop people who can do this from getting all of our information. So what's the best thing to do? Say it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right? Say it doesn't work so that all of the naysayers out there can say, yeah, I told you it doesn't work. It's fake, and they can shut it down, and more people don't want to do it. And only a small little sect. If you think about it, our community that is out there actually doing remote viewing is very small, right? In comparison to just like a sport, like if you just look at basketball, there's millions of people doing basketball. It's probably like couple thousand that might do remote viewing, maybe 1,000 that do it really good, maybe 100 that are exceptional, and those guys don't really even have a reason to practice other than they just want to practice and they want to do it on their own. So it worked, and it's a lot harder to believe those 10 people or 100 people than it is to believe thousands of people who really are invested in this. And so you win that scenario by keeping people in fear and keeping people separated, right? And that's what I'm feeling when I get these emails about, oh, you're going to get all the psychic people together. Yeah, because we're alone. We're alone. We have small communities, and that it's really easy to squash those small communities. But when we're a massive force, we can't be stopped. When we're a massive force of consciousness. And the enemy of consciousness and community is separation and isolation.
You sound like Professor X.
Transparency. Professor X, I was thinking the same thing. Professor X. That's literally what I was thinking about a few minutes ago. Like somebody needs to become the Professor X and start a school. It's probably Hakim, but also it makes me think about how transparent, like the transparency you're bringing to all of this is not, you're considering all these different aspects that I don't think have been presented in quite this way before. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, because you have more in-depth knowledge of the whole Psi community at this point than I do. But I mean, you're just putting it out there. Like, it's not even, if Psi Games was something that was a closed event to a certain degree, where it was going to be filmed and made into a documentary and then presented, that still wouldn't have the same impact as, people just being able to go to your event, wander around, interact with all the people who are demonstrating, who are the practitioners, the parents, the kids. I mean, there's the researchers, the scientists, like there's full access at Psi Games, and I don't think it's quite been done like this before, right? Where even the demo that you did at CITD just recently, where Anthony and I originally met, that was, I know it's been heavily criticized because people are saying, well, it wasn't really scientifically done, and there were no controls and the protocols weren't there and stuff like that. You never said it was supposed to be a hardcore scientific experiment that was going to be on stage. You said it was going to be a demo, and it was a demo. And then there's going to be more of that and scientific procedure at Psi Games, not to mention going back to what Anthony was saying about ethics. I want to touch on that again, because I know another question that people have had about Psi Games is, well, how are the children going to be treated? How are they going to be protected? How are they going to be guided through this process of, competing at Psi Games, but also being part of this very adult dominated event with really high level knowledge? So can you speak to the ethics of how you're approaching having children involved in the Psi Games? I think that's important for people to hear.
Yeah, so right now we're just doing demonstrations with children and having them have fun if they want to, right? But I'm going to say something that's super controversial, and this comes from 17 years of teaching children, right? Teaching them martial arts, right? So I have families that come in and they have issues with their children. The children don't listen, or they're doing this, or they're doing that. And when I start to talk to them, what I find sometimes is that it's the parents that are doing like the hover parent thing, where they don't want them to like go too far, and they don't want this, and they want to have this, and then I will get the child in my class and I will train them and teach them, and then their family will come to me and they be like, they do things for you we can't get them to do. What are you doing that's different? I've had this conversation 100 more times in the 17 years, probably more than 100. It's got to be even more than that. And I say, I challenge them. I don't diminish them. I say, hey, let's try it. Go for it. And what I'm finding in this community, this consciousness community, is everybody's afraid to shut the kids' sight down and this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. And what I found is kids are very resilient.
Yes.
And if you are touching them with kid gloves, then they may not explore or grow.
Yeah. It's like taking the swings at a playground or something, right?
Yeah. It's like, hey, dude, scrape your knee because you're going to be more resilient. We don't want you to like your head to fall off, but definitely, a fall here and there actually toughen, makes you. A matter of fact, there's that experiment where you see the baby or the kid, and if the kid falls and the parents say, oh my God, then the kid starts crying. But if the parents like just sits back and like, hey, get up, the chances are the kid just gets up, wipes the knee off, and then continues to play. So if we can allow children space to be explorative, to be successful, but also to understand what it feels like to not be successful, then they become more resilient. Their skills become resilient. And sometimes I don't know if that's happening. So, the consciousness community sometimes some people, not everybody, can be very kit glovish, right? Where everything has to be super sensitive. There's a masculine and the feminine. They both are important. So whereas one nature wants to nurture, the other wants to, wants to help build the character in the sense of resiliency, and be this kind of more stern force in that energy. And they're both there, and they both can balance and go back and forth. So the feminine can be stern sometimes, and the stern can be feminine sometimes, and softer and nurturing. And that's the balance. But the consciousness community can't become all like, stern, and it can't be all like soft and nurturing. It has to be a little balance in there. I'm going to have a conversation with you. We're going to hug each other. We're going to love each other. And
Yeah,
I'm also going to call
totally.
you on your bullshit and straight up say, like, that's bullshit. I don't like it. And then we hug each other some more. And then we go along our separate ways, even if we don't agree all the time. And I've
Yeah.
had several conversations with people who I've tried to explain that I don't agree with them. And then all of a sudden I become demonized, or, oh, you're mean and you're like this. And I'm like, why? Because we don't agree. It doesn't mean we can't be friends. We can still love each other, right? Nope, we can't love you. And you can't love you. I thought this was a compassionate conversation. It is, but you just can't hear what I have to say. I hear what you have to say, but it's not compassionate because I'm still going to love you and you don't want to talk to me after this. So, so which one of us is being compassionate? So going back to that, I digress. I'm all over the place with this topic because it's very important to me. Children we will protect them through our love and bringing them together and showing them that we believe in what they can do. And we also are going to prepare them for growth in a world that can be sometimes very painful and a struggle, by building resilience, by allowing them to have a space where they can fail upward or forward, right? If they don't succeed, that's okay. That's okay. It doesn't have to be always success. It doesn't always have to be your way. You can
I think,
succeed forward. You can have that trip, and I'm going to help you up, and we're going to continue to walk forward.
yeah, and at Psi Games, you're also exposing children to seeing adults do that. Like they're getting to see
Yes.
adults play and fail and deal with the experience of failing and then picking themselves back up and going, well, I've learned something from that failure. Now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to do that. Like it's as if the children get to learn and fail alongside adults, which is not a very common experience. I think for kids, we're so busy as adults trying to show kids we've got it all together, and, partially to help them feel secure and help them feel like they're being properly taken care of. But there's a disadvantage to that, because then kids don't get to see us dealing with our flaws, our weaknesses, and the power that's within that as well. So I love that you're providing this transparency in the context of Psi Games. And Anthony, I think you had something you wanted to say or ask. Go for it.
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much more of Hakim's time, but I did want to give him a chance to, if you could please share a bit more detail about like what kind of competitions will be taking place there and what the actual structure of the games will be like, and what are some of the amazing speakers you have lined up for us.
Yeah, so speaker-wise, we have Tom Campbell, we have Chris Bledsoe, Adam Curry, we got Danny Sheehan, their keynotes. And then we have other speakers who are really well-known, Paul Smith, John Alexander. We have Chris Ramsey, who's a up-and-coming, amazing person who's not just a magician, but a magician turned, that's a really weird realm, right, to be in. We have Nelson. I tried to bring together different people with different backgrounds. And Nelson is a 6-time U.S. memory champion who, in the process of becoming this memory champion, started having these experiences where he felt like information was no longer actually coming from inside of his brain, but it was like it was actually being stored on the proverbial cloud of consciousness, that he was pulling it from somewhere else. And you gotta he has some really cool videos where he plays that Simon Says, where you have to remember the colors.
Yeah.
And he was able to do that with 34 different colors, and it's like insane. You're watching the video, and the Simon is like ba 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 ba, and it does 34 times, and then he puts on his blindfold and he goes ba 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 ba, and it's like wow. And it's just the amazing memory this guy has. It seems like magic, And so we have people like him. We have Julia Mossbridge. We have Jeff Turrent, and people may remember Jeff Turrent from the telepathy tapes. He was alongside Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell. He was the guy who did the EEG, so he's going to be talking about that. Diane Hennessy Powell will be there. She is the scientist from the telepathy tapes, but she's been doing a lot of work on autism, in savant syndrome, and in the Akashic record, and things of that nature, and the connection between people who are able to have these spontaneous savant experiences where they, go out one day, they know nothing about math and quantum physics, they hit their head, they wake up, and all of a sudden they know everything about math and quantum, and like, where does that information come from? So we have so many different people talking, so many different experiences. We have this experiential concert that will be going on for people who are part of the VIP, group that have the platinum membership. And Jane Kuva from the UK will be coming.
Oh, I didn't know
there's
that.
going to be like these,
cool.
Yeah, these lights, and these lights are going to be part of the weird technology that runs these dual REGs. And so as her music and her energy changes, and as the room shifts and their energy, it'll be reflected in these lights that'll be around the room. So we have that going on. We got a Skywatch with Chris Bledsoe, so he's going to be there. So it's going to be a multitude of things. And then, of course, we have the games, and the games are going to be different games designed to help test people's different abilities. And the different genres are remote viewing, mind sight, the ability to see without your eyes; precognition, the ability to see or tap into a future event before it happens. We have dowsing, pendulum dowsing, your ability to find certain items that you don't know, or what you're looking for, but you don't know where it is. So you can use this pendulum dowsing as a means to help channel that energy so that you can figure out where it is. And I think that's telekinesis, right? So, or psychokinesis. So your ability to influence energy and matter, right? So, we have games where you're going to have to influence things on a screen digitally, and then for psychokinesis, and then we have a game where you have to actually influence something that's a hard matter. So people will be able to see the two in action. The same with remote viewing. We're going to have some digital stuff and hard. So we have a micro and a macro of every game. Micro would be something that's digital form, and macro would be something that's hard form, something that you have to actually physically do. That's how we're going to run it. So this way, one of the things I hope to help people understand too is, again, get over that fear. We have this fear of AI and the things that AI and technology is going to do. But we are our greatest technology. Human beings are the greatest technology, and we have this potential that we haven't even begun to really tap into. We've heard sages talk about it, and quite often the only way we know to be that way is through taking some sort of sage path where you have to like go off and like do some really hard training. And that exists too. I don't want to downplay that. As a matter of fact, I think that's the safest way to do it. But we also have a lot of people out here having these real experiences, and we need to help them too. And we need to help grow them. And so if we are operating at our highest potential, we have this ability to be able to influence machines. We have this ability to influence matter. And that's something that tech is not going to be able to do on the same level. Obviously, a computer can make a robot move, so it's influencing matter, but we'll be able to make that thing move with no Wi-Fi, with the ultimate Wi-Fi connection, tapping into consciousness. And so that's really where I feel like we'll be able to thrive in this and help people relinquish some of their fears about how we're going to deal with the future, relinquish their fears about being taken away by small government entities and, thrust into some weird hidden program somewhere where they're studied. And we can also bring this to the mainstream so we can show the world how powerful each one of us is as an individual and how much more powerful we are as a collective.
That's amazing. I wanted to share one last thing with you. We just interviewed Nadia, who was on stage with you. Sorry, not Nadia, Dahlia. Excuse me, Dahlia, who was on stage with you at Contact in the Desert, whose daughter Lidu is autistic and has these amazing capacities. And Dahlia told us what Lidu told her in our interview, which was to do telepathy, you have to be in a state of ecstasy. And that just, it fits so well with what you're talking about, this playfulness, this influence that children have had in these spaces, and how we need to get back to that as a society. And I think that's amazing that you're doing this work. So Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thanks. Yeah, that's the beauty. And just to finish it out on your going back to your ethics question I never answered, that's where the ethics come in. If you can read people's mind and everybody can read each other's mind and you can see things in different places, it's very important for us to have good sound ethics. And it's very important for kids to be around somebody who has an understanding or can help with that, the understanding of those ethics as they start to come up and they start to be able to do these, and more kids are born into the world with telepathic powers. Okay, maybe it's not, you think this person is cute. It may not be cool to just pop up in their living room at any time you want to, just like it wouldn't be cool for somebody to just walk in anybody's front door without being invited. So you got to help with those type of things. I always use Yoga Sutras of Patanjali as a guide for this, where the 8 limbs of yoga starts with the yamas and the niyamas, which are like the right living and the self-observances, and they just kind of have this idea, or they give you a guideline on like how best to operate. So, and it sets you up with a foundation of ethics, so that as you start to gain these powers and these abilities through your meditation and your breath work, that you have something, an anchor, and you don't just float away or do all the wrong things. And even with that, though, you have people out there who have spiritual abuse and things of that nature. So maybe humans are humans. We all have things that we need to work on. Some of us just don't choose to work on them, and others us are trying to work on them. So there's that. And this state of ecstasy that she's talking about, this playfulness, is something that we definitely need to really work on if we want to bring it to the mass, because not everybody's into science and all of the stuff. I mean, less people are into that than they are into just having fun and enjoying themselves. And that's where I really think we'll have the most success.
Yeah. Even the scientists.
Well, I mean, we were joking.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And some of the scientists are actually incredibly playful, fun people, which I personally did not expect. When I first started coming into this field, I thought I was going to meet really just like the typical, cut and dry, super academic, left brain scientists. But one of the things that's so fascinating about this field, meaning ufology, spirituality, psi, like all these interconnected things that exist in our field of study, our collective field of study, the 3 of us, is how fun a lot of people are, like how intelligent and playful and adventurous a lot of them are. And actually going back to Professor X again, makes me think of how many adults love the Marvel universe. Like the Marvel universe, that whole billion-dollar enterprise has been fueled really by adults buying tickets to see these things, because there's a part of us that craves that, like craves our superpowers and craves playfulness and cartoons and, that fantasy world. So yeah, I really love that you're bringing the theme of play and adventure back into these very serious topics that have been secretly studied by scientists and other people for so many decades, are now making their way onto the mainstream in a totally new way. So Psi Games is like a new doorway for people to get to experience what's been hidden from us. It has been, I'm reluctant to keep using that phrase, but it really has been hidden from us for all this time, this information and this knowledge and these abilities that human beings have that have been utilized by powerful people for a very long time. Now it's getting out there into, as you said, the masses and the mainstream. And that's so exciting. I'm so excited that we are alive at this time to see these things happening, to be able to attend an event like Psi Games, to be able to have these conversations in a way that is still kind of new for so many people, right? So I'm grateful, Hakim, for you being here and sharing with us all of your knowledge and understanding and your life story and all these amazing moments that you've had that have helped you get to where you are now, because you're a powerful person. You're helping other people discover their own power. So I'm grateful for that. We're really happy to have had you here and can't wait to get to the Psi Games. It's going to be amazing.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's going to be a good time. And I wanted to make a point on what you just said about like these powerful people using this. There is no knowledge that wealthy people are hiring remote viewer teams to do futures markets. They're doing associative remote viewing to tell them where to put their money, as far as like, on this stock, or move it over this stock and this thing right here. And they have these groups sign NDAs so they can't tell anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So that their company doesn't look bad or, or get any bad press. So powerful people believe in it and they're using it, it's just the layman that's, still trying to understand like where we are and being told by some powerful groups that we are diminishing our abilities to be grown. So,
and that's been going on for a long time, like back in the
for a long time.
ages of monarchies and stuff. Like you had royalty having their their magician or whoever working with them, their wizard or witch. And yeah, that's, I mean, whatever tools were able to be accessed were used to get ahead, and that's still taking place. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for breaking the PSYOP that has turned this sci-fi and fantasy world into something that you're hopefully turning it into something that will be realized that it's accessible to everyone, and it's just part of our life. It's part of our capacities. So we're very grateful. We will both be there at the Psi Games, August 1st through 3rd in Charlottesville, Virginia, correct?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Hakim. We look forward to seeing you in a few weeks and can't wait.
Thank you.
Thank you.